The wind had teeth that night, and the mercury fell to 50 below zero before the sun even set. Richard Hale, who had mocked John the loudest, beat on the cabin door with frozen fists. The door swung inward. Warm air and amber lamplight spilled over the snow.
Merrick, for God's sake, I can't feel my hands. Please, let me in.
John pulled him inside without a word. Richard stumbled, then stopped cold. His eyes locked onto the far wall.
What? What is that? The whole wall. It's on fire.
2 months earlier, nobody in that valley would have believed a man could heat a home with whale oil. John had hauled barrels through the village street, while neighbors stared like he was mad.
They're going to think you are mad, John. Burning whale oil inside a house.
Let them think it. The Arctic whalers burned oil for years. Clean flame, steady heat. It works.
The next morning, John unlatched a wooden crate and lifted out a polished brass lamp, its wick white as salt.
So it's true. You plan to light our house like a whaling ship?
On the Arctic fleets, we carried nothing else. No wood, no coal. The lamp was our only fire.
He struck a match and held it to the wick. The flame caught, yellow, tall, and remarkably still.
No smoke, no sputter. It burns like a candle, but somehow warmer.
She watched him mount a second lamp, then a third, until a whole row of brass fixtures lined the wall. By sundown, a neighbor walking past the cabin paused, staring at the golden window, and hurried off with a frown.
They're already whispering, John. Give it a week, and the whole valley will think you've lost your senses.
Let them whisper. The flame tells the truth. Wood gives up, but oil endures.
But endurance was a lesson the valley hadn't learned. Richard Hale was already sharpening his sharpest weapon, ridicule. The general store smelled of coffee and cold iron. A dozen men in heavy coats had gathered around the stove when John pushed through the door.
Look who's here. Tell me, Merrick, still burning your fish grease for heat?
The room went quiet. Then a low snicker rippled through the crowd.
It burns clean and long, Richard. No smoke, no soot, enough light to read by.
Read? A man doesn't read by whale puddles. Wood is what a man burns, not some stinking oil from a dead animal.
Richard's laugh was theatrical. He slammed his hand on the counter. The men joined in louder. Outside, Elizabeth had just stepped onto the porch to call John for supper. She stopped when she heard the laughter inside. Through the window, she saw her husband alone, straight-backed, saying nothing while the town's ridicule washed over him.
They'll never stop, John. I heard them. You can't make them understand something they don't want to see.
Not until they need it. Then they'll remember every word, and they'll come knocking.
That evening, Elizabeth sat sewing by the row of lamps. The glow was steady, golden, and entirely smokeless.
No soot, no flicker, just a clean. Even warmth I can feel across the room. John, it's like daylight, but softer. How can it be so bright?
Whale oil burns hot and pure. On the ship, we never saw soot on the ceiling.
He knelt and held his hand near the brass lamp. Heat radiated outward, as if from a small stove.
They might laugh, but this is better than our wood stove ever was.
The flame doesn't lie. It'll prove itself in time.
He took her hand. They sat a long moment in the warm circle of light, the cabin finally their own.
He's not crazy. He's seen something this valley can't imagine, a world without wood.
But the valley had its own truth, and Richard Hale was about to sharpen his mockery into a weapon of open war. A few days later, in the store, Richard called Merrick to the counter with a crowd of men at his back.
I am a generous man. Merrick, I'll pay 10 cents a gallon for your whale oil. Take the offer.
It's worth 10 times that, and you know it. I didn't haul barrels from the coast to be robbed.
Then you'll die with your barrels full, old man, and we'll bury you with them.
A nervous laughter skittered through the room, but died when John didn't flinch.
We'll see who lasts the winter, Richard. The cold doesn't care about pride.
Richard laughed again, but this time the sound was hollow, and the men shuffled uncomfortably. John walked out into the snow. His jaw was tight, and for the first time his stride faltered, but he did not look back. The gauntlet was thrown. Winter would be the judge, and in the lamplight of his own cabin, the whaler's truth waited on the season's first hard test. A fortnight later, the first true cold snap crept down from the peaks. By dawn, the creek ice sang like struck glass.
My word, Elizabeth, it is like summer in here. We burned our last split wood before midnight.
Come in and warm yourself. It's the lamps, Martha. They put out more heat than you would credit.
Martha touched a brass lamp, felt the heat radiating through the metal, and shook her head in disbelief.
We have a hearth full of cold ash, and your cabin feels like June. Thomas won't believe me.
The rumor reached the store later that day. The whaler's cabin had not needed a stick of wood through the freeze.
A fluke. Whale oil will freeze solid the moment a true cold settles in. Mark my words.
But the woodpile behind Richard's store was shrinking faster than anyone wanted to admit.
The cold is just starting. They'll remember the lamp when their hearths go dark.
But for now, the village clung to Richard's confidence, and the sky over the mountains slowly thickened with a far colder promise. That night, Elizabeth bent over a small ledger, a lamp at her elbow, her pencil scratching slowly across the page.
John, I've kept a tally. The lamps have burned a full week on a single filling, and the warmth is steadier than any stove.
She turned the book around so he could see the columns. Hours of burn, oil consumed, wood saved.
Show me what you found.
1 gallon of oil yields heat like a quarter cord of good oak, but it burns 3 days. No smoke, no soot, no splitting wood.
John straightened, and a quiet smile pulled at the corner of his mouth, the first true satisfaction she had seen since the store.
Then you see why the whalers trusted nothing else. And there's more where this came from, Elizabeth. A great deal more.
More? You never spoke of it.
John glanced past her, toward the snow-drifted window, toward the dark tree lane where an old shed lay buried to its eaves.
I kept it for a hard winter, and I think that winter is coming. I'll show you the cache soon enough.
The next morning, John led Elizabeth along a faint trail through the fresh snow, toward the tree line where the old shed hunkered. He unlocked the hasp and pulled the door wide. A lantern he kept burning inside threw amber light over a vast, tarp-draped mound. He pulled back the heavy canvas. Barrels were stacked to the rafters, their lids stamped with the mark of the old whaling fleet.
How much is here?
Enough to light and heat the valley for a time.
She counted at least 15 barrels along the wall, and John nodded toward a dark corner where more were stacked underneath.
You held on to all this? All these years?
A whaler never throws away what saved his life. I knew a hard winter would come.
They closed the shed, the hasp clicking shut. The secret now rested between them, heavier than the snow on the roof, and as they made their way home, through the silent trees, the weight of what they carried, in knowledge, not oil, settled deeper than the cold. The store's woodpile was bare. Richard stood behind the counter, his fur cap pulled low, nothing left to sell.
No more wood in the valley. You'll have to burn whatever you can scavenge.
Thomas Cole found John outside the cabin later that day, worry carved deep into his weathered face.
Merrick, I've half a cord left and 4 mouths. It won't last the month.
John handed him a small flask of oil, instructing him to light it tonight and see for himself. That evening, Thomas struck a match. The lamp caught, steady and golden, and the chill in the room eased.
It's warm and bright. Thomas, this is what the Merricks have been telling us.
The next morning, Martha hurried through the snow to the Merrick cabin, her face alight with the news.
Elizabeth, tell John I was wrong. That oil saved us last night. We owe him.
Richard's face went cold when he heard the whisper. But John, standing before his row of lamps, felt the air shift, a deeper cold massing over the peaks, the storm that would test everything. A fur trapper, his cheeks half rotten with frost, stumbled into the store, and the room fell silent. 50 below by Tuesday, he gasped. And it'll hold a week, maybe longer. Richard's shelves were stripped. He met the panicked stares with empty hands.
You heard, John? 50 below for a week.
I heard. The lamps won't flicker. The colder it gets, the steadier they burn.
The whalers had a saying, "The cold finds wood, but oil endures." He checked the backup flasks, his hands steady as a surgeon's. Outside, the sky was already darkening, heavy with the promise of a storm that would test every hearth in the valley. But inside the Merrick cabin, the lamps were full and the wicks were trimmed. The whaler's secret was ready. All that remained was the cold itself, and the cold was coming. By midnight, the wind died. The air grew so cold it burned to breathe. Inside the Merrick cabin, the row of lamps burned steady as ship's lights. John added a drop of oil to a wick.
The lamps are life now. Without them, this room would be a coffin.
She touched the icy pane. Beyond, the valley was black. Only their window glowed.
Not a single other flame. They're all dark, John.
They'll learn. A lamp that needs no wood is worth more than a cord of oak at 50 below.
By dawn, buckets were ice cubes. Fires had died. Frost crawled up the walls in the dark houses. But the Merrick cabin was golden. The whale oil lamps had outlasted the night.
One night down, 6 more. Then they'll come.
The freeze was just beginning. Soon, every dark window would face the light of the man they had mocked. Inside his own house, Richard Hale sat before a dead stove, his wife's breath misting white, their children huddled under frozen blankets.
The whale oil, the Merrick cabin, the thing I mocked.
He stood abruptly, grabbed his heavy coat, and pushed out into the howling dark. The blizzard tore at him. Snow caked his beard, and the cold bit deeper with every stride. When he reached John's door, he beat on it with both fists, the sound frantic, barely audible over the wind.
Merrick, for God's sake, please. I have nothing. I was wrong. I was a fool.
The door swung open. A wall of golden lamplight poured out, and Richard flinched as if he'd stepped into a furnace.
My wife is freezing. I burned the furniture. There's nothing left.
John Merrick stood in the doorway, his face half lit by the warm glow, unreadable as the sea. He said nothing. He simply looked at the man who had humiliated him, and the silence stretched like a frozen river. Elizabeth appeared behind him in the doorway, her face a mixture of pity and the silent question she dared not voice. Would he turn Richard away? Without a word, John turned, stepped into the warm cabin, and returned carrying a small ceramic flask of pale amber oil. He pressed the flask into Richard's shivering hands. The merchant's frozen fingers closed around it as if it were the last ember on earth.
How much do I owe you?
Nothing. Go keep your family warm.
Richard clutched the flask like a drowning man holding a spar. He stumbled back into the blizzard, the warm light from the doorway fading behind him. John stood in the doorway a moment, watching Richard disappear into the swirling snow.
You did right, John.
One night won't save them all. We'll need the shed soon.
He looked past the frosty window, toward the dark tree line, where the shed waited. The weight of all those barrels, enough to light and heat the entire valley, settled on his shoulders like a sacred burden. Day 3 of the freeze. The wind never rose. The cold simply deepened until even the snow groaned under its own weight. Thomas and Martha Cole stumbled to the Merrick door, their hands white, their faces cracked with frost.
We burned the last split rail this morning.
There's nothing left, Elizabeth. Please, a flask, anything.
John looked at the shelf. 5 flasks remained. A dozen more faces had already appeared outside.
John, you know what we have. This is why you kept it, for a winter like this.
He saw it then, the cold church, the children huddled, the dark windows of the valley. A whaler's code echoed from years at sea. You never let a crewman freeze when you had oil to spare. John straightened. The weight of the decision settled into his bones, but his voice was steady.
Get the sled, Thomas. We're going to the shed.
He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The weight of his words promised enough. The secret would not stay buried any longer. The whaler's cache was about to light the valley. The sled's runners scraped on ice as John and Thomas pushed through the deep snow toward the tree line.
I never knew you had anything back here, John. What is this place?
John didn't answer. He just unlocked the hasp and pulled the heavy door open. Inside, a lantern burned. The light fell on barrels, rows of them, stacked to the rafters. Thomas froze.
Good Lord, John. This is a whaling ship's worth. How did you keep this secret? It's all we have. We'll ration it. Each family gets 1 flask to start.
They loaded a heavy barrel onto the sled. Snow began falling again, soft but relentless. John locked the shed behind them, the hasp clicking shut, but the secret was out now, and it could not be locked again. The whaler's secret was out. The question now was whether it would be enough. John looked back toward the dark village. The sled heavy behind him, the long cold still ahead. Back at the cabin, a line of villagers had already formed in the snow, their faces carved with cold and hope.
1 flask per family. Don't let the wick smoke. Keep it low, and it'll burn all night.
Inside Martha Cole's cramped home, John knelt before a small table and showed Thomas how to trim a fresh wick.
A long wick smokes and wastes oil. A short wick burns clean. This is the whaler's way.
Richard Hale appeared at the cabin's edge, face downcast. John handed him a flask without a word, and Richard took it, avoiding his eyes.
We have enough for everyone tonight, Martha. Tomorrow we'll fill from the big barrels.
As dusk fell, lanterns bobbed along the road like a procession of fireflies, each one carrying a small flame home. By full dark, every window in the valley glowed. The village, which had been a graveyard of cold, was alive with amber light. The village that had mocked him now depended on his knowledge. John stood at his own window, watching the scattered lights, and for the first time, the burden on his face eased. On the 6th morning, the cold still held at 40 below. John lifted a lamp and found the oil still half full.
Your whalers knew what they were doing. John, 6 days and the lamps haven't failed once.
Richard Hale appeared in the doorway, his face weary, an empty flask in his hands.
I came to return this, and to say, I was wrong, John, about the oil.
Keep it, and help me fill more for the East Side families.
Richard knelt beside him, filling flasks from the big barrel. The man who had called it fish grease now worked shoulder to shoulder with the whaler. Elizabeth watched from the corner, a quiet smile on her lips. By afternoon, Thomas Cole and Richard were carting a fresh barrel to the East Side cabins. The whale oil cache, once a secret, had sustained the entire valley through 6 days of brutal cold. But the freeze wasn't over, and the oil still had to last. Yet, for the first time, John felt the weight of his secret turning into purpose. On the 8th day, the wind shifted. The mercury climbed above zero, and the church bell rang, calling the valley together. They crowded into the pews, still wrapped in coats, their faces marked by the ordeal, but alive.
We owe our lives to John Merrick and his whale oil lamps. I called him a fool. It was I who was the fool.
A murmur rippled through the congregation. Richard's voice broke, but he continued. John sat motionless, his face unreadable. Elizabeth's hand found his and squeezed. The merchant, who had mocked him, now stood before the valley, bearing witness to the whaler's truth. The room erupted not in applause, but in a deep, grateful murmur, a sound John had never expected to hear. John did not look at the crowd. He looked at Elizabeth, and a faint, tired peace crossed his weathered face. The lamps that had been called foolish now lit the church, and the valley understood. The whaler's secret had saved them all. Later, outside the church, the air held the promise of spring, but the warm glow in every cabin window remained, a testament. Back in the quiet cabin, Elizabeth poured fresh oil into a lamp. John sat motionless, his eyes on the flame.
How did you first learn all this, John? The lamps, the wicks, all of it.
When we were stuck in the ice north of the Bering Strait, the captain ordered every lamp lit. We had no wood, no coal.
The painting of the whale hunt above the lamps seemed to flicker as he spoke.
Just whale oil and a will to live. The lamps didn't only heat the below decks, they kept us sane. Light in the polar night.
He described the long weeks in the ice, the whole crew gathered around the lamp bank, their breath misting, their spirits held by the glow.
Then this is not just fuel. It's a tradition.
A tradition we nearly forgot on land.
The lamps flared gently, as if acknowledging the story. Elizabeth came and sat beside him, and the hour grew late, but the warmth inside the cabin, and between them, was no longer only from the flame. The next morning, Elizabeth's face was troubled as she looked out toward the far ridge. 2 homes out there were surely dark by now.
John, the old widow and the trapper's family only had 1 flask between them. They'll be freezing.
Then I'll go to them. No one stays in the dark.
John hitched the sled and pulled it through the drifting snow toward the far ridge. Inside, the widow's cabin, the children's faces were pale, their breathing shallow in the deep cold. He knelt and struck a match. The lamp caught, and the yellow flame lit the room. The littlest girl's eyes grew wide as the warmth touched her face for the first time in days. The old woman wept silently, her frozen fingers reaching toward the flame.
No one gets left in the cold. Whalers rule.
His old whaling stores had held more than enough. The foolish lamps had saved the entire valley. At dusk, the valley gathered not in the church, but on the snowy road, each person carrying a lit lamp. They placed the glass chimneys on their own window sills, a chain of small suns thawing the long dark. Richard Hale walked through the gathering, his fur cap in his hands, until he found John near the old oak.
We'll never see wood the same way again, will we?
Number. But you'll always have the light.
The 2 men stood in the snow, the merchant and the whaler, no longer divided by pride. Elizabeth joined John at the edge of the gathering, and together they looked out over the valley. Every window, from the church to the farthest cabin, glowed with the steady ancient light that had once saved ships in the frozen sea. John Merrick, the whaler they had called a fool, stood at the center of it all. The long freeze was over. The light remained. Later that night, the cabin was quiet. John sat alone at the table, a single lamp burning before him. He trimmed the wick with practiced care, and the flame steadied. In the Arctic, they called the lamp the heart of the ship. Without it, The crew would freeze in their bunks. John had seen men survive the polar night with nothing more than these flames. He looked out the window. Across the dark valley, warm points of lamplight dotted the snow like stars fallen to earth. A faint smile crossed his weathered face, not triumph, but peace. The secret of the whale oil lamps had saved the valley. But for John, it had simply been the whaler's way. The lamp wick burned steadily, an ancient light that had endured the ice and now warmed the valley. Outside, the snow fell softly on the cabin roof, and inside, the whaler trimmed his lamp as he once had on the frozen sea. The valley slept in the lamplight, and the long winter was no longer an enemy, but a memory.